Thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. You know, this was probably bound to happen. I think we should have known this was coming. I'm not sure we could have known that it would finally come out right in the middle of the impeachment proceedings against the president for asking a foreign country to help him against the Democrats in the next election. I don't think we could have known it was going to come out in the middle of all of this, but it was going to come out sometime. So why not now, right? When it rains, it pours. The reason we should have known this was going to come out at some point is because not all that long ago, less than a year ago, it was spelled out clear as day in public by a recently fired Trump cabinet official. And this sort of stuck in my craw at the time because it was Rex Tillerson who said it. And I am sort of obsessed with Rex Tillerson. And personally, I'll just let you know, at the time Rex Tillerson made these remarks, I was in the middle of writing my book, which has just come out in the past week. And if you have seen the book, you may have noticed that it is more about Rex Tillerson than it is about any other single person. I'm obsessed with Rex Tillerson. I have essentially memorized all public utterances from him since Trump, surprise, plucked him out of ExxonMobil and installed him as Secretary of State in the first place, even though we'd never met him before. But in December of last year, Tillerson had been fired already, and he did an interview that was, I think, sort of a live event. It was on stage in front of an audience in Texas, and it was Rex Tillerson talking to CBS's Bob Schieffer. And in that instance, my friend, Rex Tillerson, let us know this was coming.
How would you describe Donald Trump?
Well, most of you probably know some of this, but I had never met Donald Trump until the day he asked me to be Secretary of State. He acts on his instincts. In some respects, that looks like impulsiveness, but it's not his intent to act on impulse. I think he really is trying to act on his instincts. It was challenging for me, coming from the disciplined, highly process-oriented ExxonMobil Corporation, to go to work for a man who is pretty undisciplined, doesn't like to read, doesn't read briefing reports, doesn't like to get into the details of a lot of things, but rather just kind of says, look, this is what I believe, and you can try to convince me otherwise, but most of the time you're not going to do that.
How did your relationship go off the rails?
Well, I think part of it was obviously we are starkly different in our styles. We did not have a common value system. When the president would say, well, here's what I want to do, and here's how I want to do it. And I'd have to say to him, well, Mr. President, I understand what you want to do, but you can't do it that way. It violates the law. It violates a treaty.
So, Mr. Tillerson, did you just say that the president asked you to do things, multiple things, that violate the law? You're saying he asked you to crime a little bit for him multiple times, and you're just now telling us after you've been fired. When the president asked you to commit crimes while you were serving as Secretary of State, did you do anything about it at the time, sir? And now, sir, would you like to elaborate? That is all he would say. I'd have to say to him, well, Mr. President, I understand what you want to do, but you can't do it that way. It violates the law. Nervous laughter from the audience. Right, so Tillerson has said this out loud. You could have bet in that moment that at some point what he was talking about there would come out. Well, now, in the middle of President Trump being impeached for allegedly abusing the powers of his office, an allegation to which he has frankly confessed, now Bloomberg News reporters Nick Wadhams and Saleha Mohsin and Stephanie Baker have finally got that story. All these months later, they've finally figured out at least part of what that was about. And if their reporting bears out, and if the House of Representatives right now is drafting articles of impeachment that, among other things, are about this president abusing the powers of his office, well, this is going to turn out to be a perspicacious time for this one to have finally come to the surface. Now, what Bloomberg is reporting tonight is something that has to do with this case. This was the press release that was put out by the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York about the unsealing of an indictment against a really, 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 really rich Turkish guy, an Iranian Turkish gold trader who was arrested in the United States In the last year of the Obama administration, he was arrested in March of 2016. He was brought to New York, where federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York, put him on trial for what they described as a multi-billion-dollar, basically a money laundering scheme, but a money laundering scheme with a very specific purpose. Essentially, the allegation from SDNY was that this guy, this gold trader, was using his sprawling international business as an international laundromat, which hid basically the source of funds and their ultimate destination. And the point of doing it was to allow countries and companies and individuals to illegally do business with Iran. Right? Iran is subject to crippling economic sanctions. International trade, international business with Iran in most parts of the world is a serious criminal act in violation of those sanctions. So running an international money laundering operation to facilitate lots of different people being able to evade those sanctions and illegally do business with Iran to the tune of billions of dollars, I mean, that was a huge national security case. But that was also a real kingpin-type operation for SDNY. But they got the guy and they put him on trial. That's how they were going after this very rich Iranian-Turkish gold trader who they arrested in 2016. Now, the gold trader guy did not appear to be running this scheme totally underground, totally on his say-so without anybody knowing about it. He had, it turned out, very, very close ties to the government of Turkey, to the president of Turkey, Erdogan, and to Erdogan's family. And when that gold trader guy got arrested in the U.S. in 2016, Turkey and Erdogan went nuts about it. They started going after personally and specifically Preet Bharara, the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, who ran the federal prosecutor's office that brought these charges against the gold trader. They specifically singled out and started attacking the judge in the Southern District of New York who was hearing that case. And I know that judges, have U.S. Marshals protection for a reason. Judges get threatened and they have to deal with angry defendants and dangerous people all the time, right? But to have the government of a foreign country, one of our supposed NATO allies, essentially running an op against a U.S. judge and singling out and threatening a U.S. judge for that judge having the temerity to oversee a case involving some Turkish guy, I mean, that was scary stuff. That was intense. That was odd. And then it got more odd. The president's first national security advisor, a man named Mike Flynn, as you know, he is now awaiting sentencing after pleading guilty to lying to investigators about his secret communications with the Russian government about sanctions during the presidential transition. But you might remember that as part of Mike Flynn pleading guilty, one of the things he also copped to was the fact that he had been a undeclared foreign agent. He had secretly been on the payroll of the Turkish government while he was serving as President Trump's national security advisor during the campaign. I remember the brilliant lead in the New York Times the first day that was reported. This was actually before Flynn pled guilty and admitted to it all in court. There was this sort of brilliant little stanza as the lead paragraph in the New York Times from reporters Peter Baker and Matthew Rosenberg that day. They said, quote, "The candidate he was advising last fall was running on a platform of America First. The client he was working for last fall was paying him more than $500,000 to put Turkey first." Mike Flynn was on the Turkish government's payroll, right? The Mike Flynn saga is still not over. He has still not been sentenced. His case has taken sort of a weird turn in the last few months. He's adopted a new set of lawyers who are kind of Fox News fixtures, and he appears to be quite aggressively shopping for a pardon from President Trump. So, among other things, he doesn't have to spend any time in prison at all. But one of the things that Mike Flynn was reportedly investigated for when he finally admitted in court to the fact that he had been on the payroll of this foreign country was this question of whether Turkey had specifically offered a whole bunch more money to Mike Flynn, a lot more money, millions of dollars to Mike Flynn, if Flynn could somehow use his influence with the U.S. government, with the incoming Trump administration, to get that rich Turkish gold trader guy freed from prison. So this Turkish guy who's got direct personal connections to the top levels of the Turkish government, he's under arrest for this really terrible set of allegations involving him basically, allegedly, running an international operation to prop up the Iranian economy with illegal money that evades sanctions. after that guy gets charged, Turkey goes after Preet Bharara, the prosecutor. Turkey goes after the judge. Turkey reportedly tells Mike Flynn they will give him millions of dollars if he frees that guy, if he can rig something inside the U.S. government to free that guy. The guy who was arrested for this scheme also at some point along the line decides that he's going to need a very special kind of lawyer for this phase of his case, and he hires a man named Rudy Giuliani to be one of his lawyers. Well, now what Bloomberg News is reporting tonight is that when Rex Tillerson said that President Trump sometimes asked him to crime, sometimes asked him to do things that were illegal. According to Bloomberg News tonight, one of the apparently illegal acts that President Trump solicited from Rex Tillerson when Tillerson was Secretary of State was that he asked for him to interfere with the Justice Department to get that Turkish gold trader guy sprung from prison, to lean on the Justice Department to stop that prosecution of that Turkish gold trader guy, to interfere with the Justice Department, specifically to interfere with Preet Bharara and SDNY to get them to stop that prosecution. Quote, President Donald Trump pressed then Secretary of State Rex Tillerson to help persuade the Justice Department to drop a criminal case against an Iranian-Turkish gold trader who was a client of Rudy Giuliani. That's according to 3 people familiar with the 2017 meeting in the Oval Office. According to these 3 sources, Tillerson, quote, refused the president's request, arguing it would constitute interference in an ongoing investigation. These same sources telling Bloomberg News tonight that the other people who were in the Oval Office meeting and heard President Trump make this request to Tillerson, they were, quote, shocked by the request. After Tillerson said no to this request from the president, according to Bloomberg tonight, Tillerson then stepped out of the Oval Office into a hallway just outside the Oval, where he, quote, repeated his objections to then Chief of Staff John Kelly, emphasizing that the request was for something that would be illegal. Now, again, Bloomberg says they've got 3 sources here. I'm dying to know who they are. I mean, I'm dying to know if, is Rex Tillerson one, right? I don't know. They're not saying who their sources are, so we do not know. We do know, according to Bloomberg's reporting, that this meeting in the Oval Office where Trump asked Tillerson to commit this crime, it occurred in the second half of 2017, which I think means that this would have happened after James Comey had already testified that President Trump had asked him to intervene with the Justice Department to quash the criminal investigation into Mike Flynn. And that, of course, had led to very serious investigation of the president himself, a national uproar. It's not like the president would have known that asking somebody to lean on the Justice Department to stop a prosecution would be a kosher thing for a president to do. We do know that by late the following year, after Tillerson was fired by Trump, he was willing to say on the record that the president had, in fact, asked him to do illegal stuff. We don't know if when Tillerson said that to Bob Schieffer, one of those illegal requests the president made of him was this one that Bloomberg is now reporting, but I'm desperate to know the answer to that, too. I mean, this would be a remarkable story at any time in any presidency, right? President intervening to try to quash investigation of connected serious national security. President beating the drum, banging his chest about Iran all the time, and then intervenes to try to get a guy who was evading Iranian sanctions, the tunes of billions of dollars. He personally intervenes to try to get the Justice Department to stop that ongoing prosecution. I mean, he tries to get a member of his cabinet to pressure the Justice Department on his behalf. I mean, that's the kind of thing for which presidents can get impeached. So for this story from Bloomberg to arrive tonight, when impeachment against this president is already in full swing, it's just... I mean, it's Wednesday. Let's see what Thursday is like tomorrow. This is our life now. Within the past 24 hours, the Trump White House has sent this bizarre letter to the House of Representatives declaring that impeachment is unconstitutional, which is sort of amazing given that impeachment is quite literally in the Constitution of the United States. If you want a little snapshot of how the president's defense is going against these full steam ahead impeachment proceedings, consider that the White House is arguing that impeachment is unconstitutional, while the president's lawyers are simultaneously arguing in court that prosecutors aren't allowed to investigate the president at all because the only constitutional remedy to his potential crimes is impeachment. So they're saying he can't be investigated criminally. He can only be impeached, and he definitely can't be impeached. And if the House tries to impeach him, it's because they're trying to take on a law enforcement role that they're not allowed to take on, because that sort of behavior is reserved for prosecutors. But again, prosecutors are not allowed to look at him, and the House can't impeach him either. So, I mean, you can see the point here that they may not, I think the nice way to say this is that they may not have their eyes on the horizon. They may have their eyes on their feet, on the immediate next step they need to take to try to answer these immediate legal questions that are confronting them. But the president's lawyers and Justice Department lawyers, who are effectively acting as the president's lawyers now, they are now making explicitly mutually exclusive, internally contradictory arguments about why the president's crimes or alleged crimes can't be held against him by any process. Eventually, those internal contradictions are going to knock down one side or the other. And eventually they're going to run out of room to run here, legally speaking. After a brutal day for the president in federal court in Washington, D.C. yesterday, that was the court hearing in which the chief judge of the D.C. District Court exclaimed out loud in a court hearing the word, "Wow," about the Justice Department's arguments that their take on presidential immunity now extends to the position that actually Watergate was okay. Nixon should never have been impeached by the House for Watergate. They never should have been allowed to have the evidence that let them draw up articles of impeachment, because that evidence never should have been handed over to Congress. Wow, the judge said in response to that. After that brutal day in federal court yesterday, today the Justice Department was basically forced to concede to that court that they are going to now start handing over investigative materials about the president that were first gathered in the Mueller investigation. They're going to start to hand over those materials to Congress, including at least some version of the FBI interviews with Don McGahn, the former White House counsel. I mean, the Trump White House has tried to block that from happening from the very beginning. They continue to try to block all witnesses from testifying in all congressional investigations, including the impeachment proceedings. We're now learning that they may be trying to block the woman who you see on the right side of your screen here, the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch. She was expected to give a deposition to the impeachment committees on Friday morning. There are suggestions now that the White House is going to try to block her from making that appearance. The White House refusing to hand over documents, refusing to acknowledge or respond to subpoenas, refusing to allow witnesses to testify, the White House making these weird assertions of privileges that don't exist in the law. That's, of course, been a point of contention between the White House and Congress all along. But in light of this impeachment inquiry, it will be much more than that. The House of Representatives now appears to be moving quickly toward drawing up the details of all of this obstruction from the White House and from the president specifically into an initial article of impeachment against President Trump. Just as the first article of impeachment against Richard Nixon in 1974 was about obstruction, it appears that the House is moving to make the first article against Trump an obstruction article as well. At least it appears to be the first one that they are working on in detail. In the course of drawing up that impeachment article, the House is now going to start getting all the obstruction materials that were already collected about the president by the FBI in the course of that previous investigation that led to the Mueller report. Right? The White House and the Justice Department have been desperately trying to block that, but the House is about to start getting those materials. I mean, that's just going to be icing on the cake in terms of them being able to write up a pattern of the president's behavior, including multiple allegations of his willingness to interfere and his efforts to interfere in ongoing Justice Department criminal investigations. And now look, as of tonight, here's a brand new one with 3 sources to Bloomberg News. Something that Rex Tillerson, I think, basically raised his hand and alerted to us months ago. It's now finally coming out. Joining us now is Nick Wadhams. He's one of 3 Bloomberg News reporters who's just broken this scoop tonight. Mr. Wadhams, thanks very much for joining us. Congratulations on this story.
Thanks for having me.
So I tried to sum up what you and your colleagues reported tonight, as well as trying to put it in context of what I previously understood about this case. I just want to ask you, and be blunt, if tell me if I got anything wrong there or if I mischaracterized anything.
I think that was an extremely impressive summation of a very complicated case.
Okay, well, that was nice of you to say. Let me ask you about this report that this detailed reporting that you have, 3 sources who are available of what happened. You report that Secretary of State Tillerson recognized the president's request that he should intervene in this criminal case as illegal, recognized it in the moment as illegal, and he immediately rejected it because it would constitute interference in an ongoing investigation. He then conveyed that, according to your reporting, to the then White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly. If this was in 2017, do you have any sense, and can you talk at all about why this might be coming out now?
Well, I think what's going on is that a lot of us were very interested, after the Ukraine impeachment, the whistleblower complaint came out. We just started digging around on, what other phone calls or interactions the president would have had and, over the course of his term so far, and, have spoken to many people who said that there were many calls the president made and many meetings he had where there were inappropriate things that were said, whether it's State Department officials or White House officials who, as in the whistleblower case in the Ukraine phone call, were shocked sometimes or at the very least alarmed or felt that something inappropriate was going on. And as I just looked for more of those cases, I spoke with people close to the president who essentially said that, hey, this was one that not only had the president asked Tillerson to do something about this case, but that he had also asked Tillerson to talk to Giuliani. So that also obviously got my spidey sense tingling a little bit, given the obvious parallel with the Ukraine case.
And Nick, do we know if anybody, presumably other than Rex Tillerson, according to your reporting, didn't do this and was in fact sort of shocked by the request and immediately decided it was illegal? Do we know if anybody else ever did approach the Justice Department and lean on them about this prosecution? I know from the case of this gold trader that it took some pretty radical twists and turns before that case was over. Do we know if this request from the president was ever carried out by anyone else?
No, well, what happened in the end was that Reza Zarrab essentially turned state's evidence with prosecutors and agreed to cooperate in a much larger case against a Turkish bank and a Turkish banking executive. But all along during the course of that trial, the State Department was essentially tasked with the job of trying to see if there could be some diplomatic bargain arranged between Turkey and the U.S., and this was at the direction of the president, to see if there could be some sort of trade made. In the end, we know, obviously, that the Department of Justice did not allow this to go through, but this was, Rudy Giuliani was hired by Reza Zarrab. Zarrab testified about this on the stand to find some sort of solution outside the confines of the court case. So it was well known at the time. Rudy was open about the fact that this is what he was doing, and the machinery of the government, at least at the State Department, was tasked with trying to help see if some sort of accommodation could be reached.
I have to ask you, Nick, NBC News, since I've been on the air, I just got handed to me a piece of paper that suggests, or that tells me, that NBC News reached out to Rudy Giuliani in response to the publication of your report tonight, and he responded by calling it a, quote, hit job, saying he never spoke to President Trump about his client, Mr. Zarrab. He called the report a hit job, and he said, I was representing him, meaning Mr. Zarrab, for a possible prison exchange. I have to ask for your response to Rudy Giuliani calling your work a hit job tonight.
Well, we did speak. My colleague Stephanie Baker spoke extensively to Rudy for this story. He initially denied that he had spoken to the president, but about halfway down in the story, we have a pretty extensive quote from Rudy saying, well, maybe I did and maybe I didn't. I may have mentioned his name once or twice. So we got inconsistent answers from Rudy on whether or not he had actually spoken to President Trump. And then he also just point blank refused to tell us whether he had spoken with Rex Tillerson about this. He said we had no right to know that.
Yeah, exactly. That was exactly the quote that I was just looking through here. Giuliani said he discussed the Zarrab case with State Department officials and disclosed that, although he declined to say if he ever spoke directly to Tillerson about the case, saying, quote, you have no right to know that. Remarkable reporting, especially given the kind of the three sides of the story you were given by just that one source. Nick, thanks very much for this. And again, congratulations to you and your colleagues on The Scoop.
Thanks a lot.
Nick Wadhams is State Department reporter for Bloomberg News. Again, this story tonight that they are breaking, that according to 3 sources with direct knowledge of the incident in late 2017, President Trump reportedly urged a cabinet official, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, to go lean on the Justice Department to stop an ongoing federal prosecution of someone who was charged with helping Iran evade sanctions to the tune of billions of dollars. Rex Tillerson, according to this Bloomberg reporting, was told that he should work with Rudy Giuliani on this. Rudy Giuliani at the time had been retained as a lawyer for that guy who Trump was trying to get off the hook. All right, lots to get to tonight. Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.